On this President's Day, when we honor our founding fathers, growing calls within the GOP to curb this president's power. Welcome, everyone. I'm Eric Bolling in for Neil Cavuto, and this is Your World. And word today, Republicans on the Hill have a new plan to stop this.
Congress is tough right now, but that's not going to stop me. I have an obligation as president to do what I can without them. With or without Congress. With or without Congress. America does not stand still, and neither will I. I'm not going to wait, because there's too much to do.
Well, the president may not be certainly may not be the first to use his executive power. He could be the last. A growing number of Republicans now sponsoring a bill called STOP. It stands for Stop This Overreaching Presidency. So far, the bill making its way through Congress has more than 100 co-sponsors. It calls for legal action to reverse a growing number of executive orders, including delaying the employer mandate and ending work requirements for welfare. Former Democratic pollster Pat Caddell says these presidential powers do need to be reined in. Pat, he's not the first president to use the executive pen. He may not even be the most frequent user of the executive pen. Why is this one different?
Well, because it's so extensive. We're kind of on a slippery slope to what I call the slow-motion banana republic. It started under George W. Bush, when the president could decide what parts of national security they were able to override the Constitution. Obama has now taken it much further. Just on health care alone, 29 times changing the law. You know, I'm happy to see the Republicans have a bill. I would be much happier if the opposition managed to get 200 their membership in the Senate to go to court to stop this. The president's done this on the NLRB. He's done it on reversing the Welfare Reform Act. But the health care thing is most abusive. It is an idea that if we have the votes, we will do whatever we want. And that is not living up to a Constitution. And what bothers me about my party, the Democrats, are what do you think is going to happen when you get the next Republican president? This is about preserving the rule of law, not the rule of men.
So talk about that a little bit, Pat. The difference here is that President Obama, after this bill went to the Supreme Court, they figured out a way to make it a law. It becomes a law. He's changed it unilaterally 29 times. That's a little different than signing an order to put a flag at half-mast because someone died, right?
Right. They're a lot different. And what we've had is with presidential signing statements, which is, I don't think this is legal, I'm not going to enforce it, to now I don't care what the law says, I'm going to do what I want, or we need to do this. No, if you don't have the rule of law, you have, as I said, the rule of men. And that's what distinguishes us from other countries. It is a very dangerous precedent we have going on. But I want to say that opposition has been very lame to this. Mm-hmm. It's like I've been saying about the IRS. They want to kill the Tea Parties, too. It's Benghazi. All the things we're not getting the truth about in our system because it is about preserving power.
Pat, I want to play sound on tape of President Obama when he wasn't so fond of using that executive pen. Take a listen.
The biggest problems that we're facing right now have to do with George Bush trying to bring more and more power into the executive branch and not go through Congress at all. And that's what I intend to reverse.
8 months later, he becomes president. What happens?
Well, he just becomes a roaring hypocrite. He now says, now I can do even more, which he does, and we have what we had. Look, we had the Senate a few months ago, more than 200-year precedent on the rights of the minority in the Senate, blown up by Harry Reid. And hardly anything was said because a lot of Republicans said, oh, gosh, we want to do the same thing. When the Republicans were trying to have the nuclear option on judges, it was Barack Obama and many Democrats who stood up against it. You would wish these people for once, on both sides, would stand for principle rather than power.
I hate to do this, I don't have a lot of time, but the NLRB is important. The reason why it's so important is because some of the decisions made under the NLRB are now under question. And it could cost taxpayers a lot of money to fix it.
Well, yes, because he made recess appointments that were, the appeals courts have already said were illegal. And then the Republicans, led by John McCain and Lindsey Graham, just caved into Obama on the issue about appointments in NLRB. It is unbelievable, this paying off of your constituencies. As I keep saying, hey, let's stand up for what our country's about, whatever party you're in.
I'm going to leave it right there. Pat Caddell, thank you very much. Remember when the president said this?
Shovel-ready was not as shovel-ready as we expected.
Well, even the president joked that the stimulus didn't exactly go as planned, but 5 years after signing that nearly $800 billion bill, the Obama administration is trying to put a positive spin on things. To Ed Henry at the White House with the very latest positive spin. Ed, go for it.
Eric, good to see you. What the White House is saying today is, look, unemployment's come down. There's been economic growth for many months now since the stimulus was enacted into law. They believe those are signs of hope in the economy and that the president stopped the nation from falling into an economic depression, something worse than the recession that we actually faced. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell very clear today in charging that the president fell well short of that promise. You'll remember when he signed the stimulus into law that 3.5 million jobs would be saved or created by this new law. Conservative economist Stephen Moore went on to say he thinks this was the worst bill ever passed in Washington because of how it turned out.
There's this view in Washington that it was sort of free money. I call it tooth fairy economics, right? That the money just comes down from the tooth fairy. But of course, you have to pay those bills.
Now, the bottom line is senior advisor Dan Pfeiffer here at the White House took to Twitter to push back and say what he's hearing from Republicans today is just more of just saying no to the president's agenda and that he faced some tough choices but had to act. This blog post on the White House website saying, quote, the economy has now grown for 11 straight quarters. Businesses have added 8.5 million jobs since early 2010, while far more work remains to ensure that the economy provides opportunity for every American. There can be no question that President Obama's actions to date have laid the groundwork for stronger, more sustainable economic growth in the years ahead. Bottom line, Eric, this was the president's first major domestic achievement. Came even before health care at the beginning of his presidency. And like health care, the controversy over the impact of the law still remains years later, Eric.
Very good. Thanks, Ed. That's why they call it Spin City. Thank you, Ed. So did stimulus work? Michelle Field says absolutely not, and the number of people still out of work proves it, but Juan Williams disagrees. Let me start with you, Michelle. Why do you say stimulus, $800 billion bucks, and I don't know, didn't they promise 5% unemployment or something like that, and now we're 32% higher than that?
Yeah, look, 5 years later and billions of dollars later, the American people are still struggling. He promised all of these shovel-ready jobs, but there are no jobs. The American people are still struggling. We have 10 million people out of work right now. The unemployment rate for African Americans is over 12%, and it's over 20% for young Americans. So I'd love for Juan to kind of explain to me why he thinks this is working, because it's clearly not.
Go ahead, Juan. You want to give it a shot?
I don't have to give it a shot. I mean, the facts are on the table. It's not only White House numbers. You can go to the Congressional Budget Office, and they'll tell you that for all of the quarters between 09 and 12, what you saw was added activity in our economy. You saw increase in jobs, the $9 million job figure that Ed Henry just cited to you, added to our economy at a time when we were in what is now called a Great Recession. So if you care about jobs, if you care about the economy, if you care about tax cuts, because remember, about 160 million Americans got tax cuts as a result of the stimulus, right, then you understand the benefit.
But, Michelle, if there are somewhere around 10 million people who have left the workforce under President Obama. If you add those back in, the unemployment rate is pushing somewhere around 9%. Now, remember, they promised 5% when they sold us this $800 billion plan. A little disingenuousness here?
Absolutely. And the labor participation rate is the lowest it's been in 35 years. And if you look at the number of people who've been unemployed for 27 weeks or longer, it's 3.6 million. This bill just went to a ton of wasteful projects and a ton of green energy companies that are now bankrupt. He promised that it would fix the economy when he sold us this monstrosity, but that's not what it was about. It was never about creating jobs. It was about rewarding the Democratic Party's donors and allies, because that's where the money went. If he was serious about creating jobs, he would approve the Keystone Pipeline.
Okay, Juan, well, let's stay off the Keystone. Let's stay on economic growth. We've still had subpar growth over the course of President Obama's term since he signed that stimulus into action. What were the promises that he made that were actually kept regarding stimulus?
Well, gee, it seems to me we have had continuous growth in this economy, that we have come out of the depths of that recession. Yes, we would like to see faster growth, but we are nowhere near where we were in 08. And let me just add quickly, remember, Paul Ryan, a good conservative, said this is a good idea. He voted for this bill. Mitt Romney wanted more spending. Most liberals in the country think the reason the stimulus hasn't had more overwhelming impact is because we didn't put enough money into it, that Obama negotiated and compromise with Republicans on the amount that he spent. And the idea that people now want to ignore and say, oh, we didn't have any economic problems, Wall Street was just fine, the American economy was just sailing along, that's ridiculous. That's like purposely demonizing Obama by ignoring history.
Well, Michelle, Juan makes a very good point that a lot of the money from stimulus was actually ended up trickling into the economy in the form of tax cuts. Now, on the left, they believe that's a good idea. What say you?
Well, look, I think that if you go ask the average American citizen how they're feeling right now, I think that they would tell you the truth, that they're suffering. So the White House and Juan can try to make it seem like this is all great, but if you talk to real Americans, they're struggling to pay bills, they're struggling to pay their mortgages, so this is not all good and dandy.
Juan?
Well, I mean, wait a second. That has nothing to do with the idea that if this money hadn't been spent, if the government hadn't invested in our economy, things would be worse off. And so you have to understand,
this money just grows on trees?
Republican and Democrat who made this investment, Michelle. No, nobody says money grows on the street, but when you engage in austerity without understanding that the economy was near cratering, then you are being blind to historic reality.
Let me
if you think the government can create jobs, then I'm sorry, that's absolutely not true.
Allow me to just jump in. Hang on, Juan, but you have to understand something. We were sold a bill of goods that this was going to create jobs, and it was going to be, remember the shovel-ready jobs and all the millions of jobs that we're going to create? Well, he never did that. They never did that. What they did was they threw some money to, hold on. What they did was they threw money to the states. Had they sold it that way, maybe we could have gotten on board with this thing and said, you know what? Good idea, but maybe we should do it permanently. Tax cuts.
I don't know. Now you sound like a lib. I don't think that's right. I wouldn't have said do it permanently. But I'm saying it. Look, the states were in absolute crisis, and it would have meant that you got rid of a lot of state workers, teachers, policemen, first responders, and the like. This saved their jobs. This saved jobs. And then to Michelle's point, it created jobs. When you do infrastructure
you create jobs by reducing taxes on our entrepreneurs.
We got to go. You know, this is like cashing in.
It's a great show.
Great discussions. We've got to leave it right there, Michelle and Juan. Thank you.